Today I'm going to be talking about Chikyuu Shoujo Arjuna, or Earth Maiden Arjuna. It was a 2001 anime directed by Macross creator Kawamori Shoji, animated by Studio Statelight, with a soundtrack by Kano Yoko. It was a show that I have a bit of history about. It's not something that I necessarily see talked about too much these days, but for the sake of this episode, it's not necessarily going to be about the show itself. It's mostly going to be about my chain of memories regarding this show, my experience watching it for the first time and then eventually revisiting it. It's kind of late, that is, me making this recording thing, because I originally had watched the show many years ago, or at least part of it, and then got around to rewatching it earlier in the spring. And I intended to make an episode about this, but then I just never got around to it. And then today I was like, you know what? I might as well, because I was in the mood to make something related to this little mini-series. So I originally tried to watch Arjuna back in January of 2021. The reason why I decided to watch the show was kind of interesting. So that was around the time when I was revisiting a lot of Digibro's old content. And there was a couple series that Digi had talked about that were on their previous favorites, I guess. I forgot which video specifically they talked about it. But if anyone has watched Digi as much as I have, they know that some of Digi's old favorites were series like Eureka 7, Arjuna, and you kind of get the point. That there was different series that Digi had talked about fondly that were, at one point or another, were part of their top favorite anime, or the number one favorite anime of all time. But regardless, this is not an episode about Digi, it's about me. So I had originally tried to watch this anime back in 2021 because this was a previous favorite of Digi, so it was on my short list of things to get around to. Because there's a couple of people in the anime community who I will not name that I hold on a fairly high regard, or at least in a list of people that I think have interesting taste. For that reason, I prioritize a lot of the shows that they place in their top 10s or are highly rated, or they talk about pretty frequently. But knowing me, my short list tends to be stuff not necessarily a short list, it's kind of like a pretty long list. And when I say I intend to get to something eventually, I literally mean that. I'm playing the long game here. If I say I'm going to watch something in 2018, I might not get around to watching it until 2021, as the case was with Arjuna. So I finally got around to watching it, and keep in mind this was around the time when I was finishing up uni. I was a hikikomori because we had pretty much exclusively remote classes for uni, and I was finishing up anyway, so there wasn't a whole lot to do. So I was just kind of holed up in my apartment. And I had been that way for at least a year. And prior to that, I was very reclusive regardless. So I was just kind of hanging around in my room, watching ecchi harem anime. And then one day I was like, you know what, I should watch Arjuna. Because I figured, might as well, I guess. Sometimes, you just get in a weird mood and you want to watch something strange, experimental. So I watched Arjuna. And I didn't get very far into the show. I don't remember exactly how far I got in. Maybe 4 or 5 episodes. I know there's a pretty strange episode early on. It's the one with the old man, and I think it's episode 4 or 5 maybe. But the production quality gets really weird all of a sudden, or they do have a lot of live action cuts in it. And something about that episode just turned me off from the show entirely. And I was like, you know what, screw this. And I do have a mini transcript of things that I wrote to myself when I was about to drop the show. And I'll paraphrase here for the sake of brevity. But I basically went on saying, I don't really see a benefit to continue watching the show because I kind of figured I got everything out of it. Yeah, it does have decent themes on paper, but care about nature or going outside, so all this environmentalist propaganda is just kind of lame and cringe and boring. Plus, the production was really rough early on, and the heavy usage of CGI and live-action clips were very, off-putting. Also, the story was kind of boring, nothing personal. And then I went on to say that it was pretty iffy from the start. It's kind of like eating something new for the first time. If you are going to like something, you'll probably know it, immediately. And if you know you're not going to like something, you'll also be able to tell pretty quickly. Very rarely is there a case where there's something that's an acquired taste, and most of the time I feel like it's mental gymnastics that are kind of allowing external factors to influence your liking or disliking of something. How to describe it? Your predisposed parameters for liking something will be reconfigured if those external factors are strong enough. And at the time, I would say it was more there was more things stopping me from liking the show than would be convincing me to like it. mainly because I was a hikikomori at the time. I was like, you know what, screw this. I don't go outside, dude. I don't care about Arjuna. The show's kind of boring. And then I went on to watch something more interesting, probably. And a couple years later, in 2024, this past spring, I decided randomly one day that I wanted to get back to Arjuna. I don't exactly remember what spurred this in me. I just kind of felt like, I don't know, like in a Zen mood or something, dude. And I decided to revisit Arjuna. But Arjuna is definitely an interesting show and something that I think would have been worthwhile to revisit anyways, because probably the most outstanding factor about or like surrounding Arjuna is the fact that it was directed and written by Kawamori Shoji from Macross fame, and like comparing the two is like apples and oranges. It's definitely not the type of thing that you expect the creator of Macross to write or direct, especially considering like a lot of the previous work was like mechanical design and stuff, and this is like the complete opposite of that. And I also find it interesting because I'm pretty sure like on the American DVD box set, they put something like from the creator of Macross or something, which is really misleading. And I'm sure a lot of other people had a similar experience to me the first time. Like they go in thinking it's going to be something, and then they start watching it and it's this weird mood piece. And that's kind of how I felt about August in Water, which is another movie. I don't remember the director. A lot of people know it because it's considered quote unquote denpa. I don't necessarily agree with that categorization, I guess. But regardless, it's one of those like mood pieces that you kind of sit down, you lean back in your chair, and you kind of just like vibe with the movie, and you get enveloped in its atmosphere, in its tone, and you don't get too invested in trying to figure out where the story is going, and you kind of just let it wash over you. You don't complain that it's boring or slow because it's methodical intentionally, and you kind of have to be in the proper headspace to watch something like that. And that's like in the exact same place that Arjuna is coming from. It's like this weird think piece, and they both came out around the same time. I want to say August in Water was probably like 97, I want to say, and Arjuna was 2001. And so around that turn of the century there was like maybe some sort of like environmentalist kick in Japan. I'm not 100% sure. But I would say if you're a fan of August and Water, you should watch Arjuna and vice versa. That they're pretty similar in terms of like how they approach their tone and storytelling. Somewhat minimalistic. Arjuna is definitely more... Now, I don't want to say involved, but it's more of a traditional narrative, I guess, but it definitely has a lot of like weird, heady moments that you just kind of have to watch and take as it is, and you can kind of interpret it on your own. But it's certainly an interesting series. Like, it was one of those anime that came out around the time when like the whole digital boom was starting, so the show was produced with Digipaint, and they also introduced a lot of CGI, and they were doing more experimental stuff with live action to sort of offset the costs. I don't know exactly how big the budget is for this one, but I don't think it was that large. It's really interesting. You don't see that many like really experimental anime like that, especially now, but at the time, it maybe because of the post-Evangelion boom where they wanted to start greenlighting a lot of more experimental stuff that happened, but like this is not like an Ava clone or anything of the like. It's way more of its own thing, and there's not too many shows like it, and not too many movies like it either. It's really cool, and if you're in the mood for that, I highly recommend it. Very nice soundtrack by Kano Yoko, like I mentioned before. That's probably that, and the director being Kawamori are most likely the reason why a lot of people know of Arjuna to begin with, or Digibro like me. Like I said, I don't necessarily see it talked about too much anymore, but it's definitely like one of those weird hidden gems, or it's more of a diamond in the rough. It has a lot of rough edges around it, but like I said, if you're in a correct mindset, it's certainly something worth visiting. Maybe the reason why I decided to return to this is because there was a pretty drastic change in my lifestyle between 2021 and 2024. For those who have not necessarily been following the narrative of PARS for the past couple of years, what ended up happening was 2021 was my final year of university. So after that, I graduated. I moved back home briefly, and then I started working. I work a 9-to-5 job these days. I still obviously watch a lot of anime. You can check out my myanimelist.net page, and you'll see that I still consistently watch a lot, because like I live with my parents, so I don't have to necessarily worry about a lot of additional things, a mortgage, or like I don't have a significant other and don't plan on it, don't have any kids, don't have a pet, so it's just me and my hobbies, and work is just a means to an end. But I'd say the biggest change is that going to work sort of forces me to go out, because when I was in university, especially at the time, because it was during COVID and there was a lot of the online classes that were happening, so I just like had no incentive to leave my apartment because I was just living in a one bedroom apartment. Maybe like every 2 weeks I would go to Walmart, buy groceries as cheap as possible, and then go back to my apartment, lock the door, and not leave for days on end. I would only leave at like weird hours of the night because I needed to throw out my garbage and I didn't want to be seen by anyone. I just wanted to be like the mysterious neighbor that no one really knew about that made no noise. Occasionally you might hear Carmel Donson blasting on his speakers. But then after I moved back home, I started working. I had to leave the house. I had to go out to work every single day. And it was a very drastic change. But in the process of doing that, I kind of became more acclimated to just sort of living a more standard lifestyle, going to work, coming home. I started to work out more. Over the past year, I've developed a working out schedule, and I work out like at least 3 times a week. And there's certainly been like a re-evaluation of my place in the world and my place in nature, like a different sort of appreciation towards a lot of the things that Arjuna was talking about. A lot of these things came to me in the time that I had initially put down Arjuna to the time that I decided to pick it back up, and was a little bit more in tune with the type of story and messaging it was trying to convey. So between the time that I initially put down Arjuna to the time I decided to pick it back up, I sort of came to understand and appreciate a lot of the things Arjuna was initially trying to convey previously, but I came to a lot of those conclusions on my own, that I understand my place in the world and in nature, and like I'm not entirely opposed to going outside anymore. I realized that my main problem is people. Like I don't have a problem with nature. It's just that I hate being outside because I associate being outside with being around crowds and people and sitting in traffic and going to the store and there being so many people that you can't really do what you want to do. That's the annoying aspect. It's not necessarily that going outside is terrible. And I gained a different sort of appreciation for nature as a result. And I was able to watch Arjuna and like get more out of it because I was more in tune. I was on the same wavelength as what Shoji Kawamori was trying to get across, I think. Maybe he reached a point in his life where he was thinking a lot of the same things that I was, and he managed to convey them through a story in a better way than I might be explaining right now.